This is episode 2 of Encounters with King's College Chapel. I'm Stephen Cherry, and my guest today is none other than the celebrated and much-loved composer of choral music who has become as closely connected with Christmas as this chapel, Sir John Rutter. John is one of the most beloved and influential composers of our time, as is witnessed by the extensive and enthusiastic celebrations of his 80th birthday. Alongside many capacity concerts, he was recently Donald MacLeod's Composer of the Week on Radio 3. And our own choir has just released a wonderful album based almost entirely on his music and arrangements called All the Stars Look Down, taking its name from a carol he wrote in memory of Stephen Cleobury. John's many works are sung in cathedrals, concert halls, and local churches across the United Kingdom, and is a massive following in the United States. While instantly recognizable, his work is continuing to develop, as he not only composes and conducts, but also produces CDs on his own label. I hugely enjoyed his recently released In a Poet's Garden, especially the first track on that, I Made Me a World, for 2 soloists, choir and orchestra. A famous verse in the Book of Psalms suggests that we should expect to live about 70 years and 10, or, if we have strength, 80. 80 John, 80 years old, has seemingly endless energy and a bulging diary, so I was especially delighted that he agreed to pop into King's one morning and talk about his relationship with our chapel and its music. The sun is shining. It's the most amazingly beautiful autumn morning here in King's College, Cambridge. And here I see John Rutter, who's come in to see me today. John, thank you so much for coming in.
It's been a pleasure.
And you had a good journey.
I did, and I live nearby. I don't think I would ever want to live terribly far from Cambridge. It's become part of me. Ever since I was a student, I fell in love with the place at an early age. I knew this was where I wanted to study music, and I've never regretted that for one moment.
So just remind me when you were here, because you were at Clare next door, weren't you?
I was indeed at Clare College, King's next door neighbour along the River Cam, and I first walked past the Porter's Lodge in October 1964.
1964. Do you remember what the first time you ever came into the chapel here? Was it before that or after you'd come up?
Well, it was when I was a student in my first term, and naturally, as a musician, I wanted to hear choral evensong. But of course, I actually knew the sound of King's College Chapel long before I ever saw the sight of it. On Christmas Eve, like millions of other people, I tuned in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I spun my vinyl discs from the school record library, and I was able to hear the sound of the choir. But the sound of the chapel itself is part of the music that is made here. It is the most remarkable acoustic. It's perfect for music. It's unmistakable. And I wanted to be where that music was made.
And you were part of where that music was made. In the decade since, you've made a massive contribution to the sound of King's and all that we've done here. It's really been remarkable. It must be an incredibly important part of your life journey, your relationship with this building.
Yes, of course it is. Any time I write a piece of choral music, part of my mental sound furniture before I even start is, what would this sound like in King's? That's a question I always ask myself if I'm writing for any sort of a liturgical choir. For example, many churches in the United States are carpeted, and they don't have anything like the acoustic beauty of King's College Chapel. But somehow the sound of King's is like a constant music track running in my brain. I don't think I will ever forget it. And it is very much woven into the musical fabric of me as a composer.
And immediately, everything feels different.
No matter how often I step inside King's College Chapel, it still takes my breath away. What is it I notice first? I suppose now it would be the fan vaulting. And that's partly because when I was a student here at Cambridge, you really couldn't see it terribly well. It was swathed in a thick layer of soot, which had accumulated over the years. And when the chapel was closed for cleaning and it was all scrubbed up, suddenly this became a place of light, because it seemed, truth to tell, a little bit dark and gloomy when I was first here. As we see it now on a sunny day, of course, we're not only getting the fan vaulting up there, but we're getting wonderful light through the stained glass windows. And at the moment, the sun is shining brilliantly through the great east window. And I know that if I return for evensong, it will shine through the west window. And there is something rather wonderful about that. There's still a lovely open expanse of space to the west where the river lies. And the light that comes through those windows is very much part of the building, isn't it? It does lift you to heaven. And the carvings just illuminate so much of the history of the place with the crowns, the heraldic beasts. All of this seen now really in a glory that probably had not been seen for centuries, simply because of the dirt and grime and soot that accumulated over them. And that was how it was when I first stepped inside this building. So probably what caught my eye first in 1964 was the magnificence of the organ. I think it's sort of part of the good example, really, of the English genius for compromise, because in a continental cathedral, the organ would be firmly in a west gallery. And in other college chapels, for example, in St John's College Chapel, the organ is to one side near the east end. Well, they put this one plumb in the middle.
It is plumb in the middle, on top of the screen. Yes. When the screen was in place, no one ever imagined anything remotely like that, organ appearing in the middle. But the point you make about compromise is interesting to me, because, of course, the choir is very close to the centre of the building as well.
Yes.
Not at the extreme east end. And I think that makes a difference to all our life here, to have the choir in the middle with congregation on both sides, clergy in the middle of the building, not tucked up at one end.
I wonder if it was always that way, but certainly the way it is now makes a statement about how the music and the choir that makes that music is part of the college community. They're not stuck up in a balcony, which is, again, something you find in quite a number of continental cathedrals. It's not like that at all. They're down here with us, in our midst.
Let's just step a little bit further into the building, John. I want to stand right on the central axis here and look east, because when we do so, another vista opens up as we look through the arch in the middle of the screen. Tell us about the picture, because that picture is absolutely connected with the story that you've already told us about the cleaning.
Well, yes, Rubens, The Adoration of the Magi, painted in the early 1630s, gifted to King's College in 1961, I think it was. And they really didn't know what to do with it when it first arrived here, because I vividly remember that it stood on the south side of the antechapel, diagonally pointing outwards from the corner, on a large schoolroom easel with wooden pegs. And there was no security of any kind. And there it stood, looking a little out of place. I mean, magnificent as it was. I think everybody realized it couldn't stay there forever. And I'm sure that the story of the remodeling of the chapel will be told from a much closer standpoint by those who were involved in it. But I do remember that there was great controversy. Clearly, with a magnificent painting like this, it deserved an appropriate place, and that fairly obviously was as an altarpiece.
So it was propped up in the corner, and we'll walk now
Yes.
towards the screen down the central aisle. So as we're walking down the antechapel, it's the right-hand corner that we're talking about, and of course the lighting there is really terrible.
Oh, I know. Yeah, there was nothing to really highlight the painting at all. And it was something that was clearly a difficult decision how they could manage its placement, because it's an enormous painting. And had they put it as an altarpiece with the height of the altar as it then was, it would have fouled the bottom of the east window, and you wouldn't have been able to see all of the east window.
Exactly. So the only way in which it could be installed at the east end was by a complete remodelling of the east end.
Well,
And it was the need for that made the occasion for the cleaning. And the chapel was entirely closed. I think you were here then for a whole year.
it was closed for a whole year. When I attended Evensong, which I loved to when I could, there was a Victorian altar there with the traditional big 6 candles,
Yes.
which you could find, to be honest, in any Anglo-Catholic church in London or Brighton or Birmingham or somewhere like that. There was nothing particular to King's College Chapel about the altar as it then was. It looked rather grandiose, which of course the Rubens doesn't. I mean, it just takes us into a different dimension altogether. And it was, in a strange way, slightly depressing.
Yes.
And so I can only think that somebody realised that it would transform the chapel to have that Rubens as an altarpiece. And it's interesting that the donor, Major Allnut, decided to give a Christmas scene, well, the Epiphany, the visit of the wise men paying homage to Jesus and Mary, because he could have chosen any subject. He could have chosen a crucifixion. He was an art collector, a very wealthy man, and a crucifixion would have been perfectly appropriate as an altarpiece. But no, he wanted something which strengthened the connection that already existed between King's College and Christmas. And I think that is such a beautiful thought, because Christmas is not greatly celebrated in the college chapels of Cambridge, because neither the students nor the dons are around at Christmas. It's a festival that sort of goes by default, really. Advent is, of course, much more possible because that falls in term time. But King's alone celebrates Christmas. And I think that a scene of Christmas just cements that relationship in the most beautiful way. And I think the donor of that painting wanted everybody to understand that King's is not just about Christmas, but King's College Chapel celebrates Christmas.
Absolutely we do. And since 1918, we've celebrated it in a very particular way, since the introduction of the Festival of 9 Lessons and Carols that year, which has continued ever since. And the directors of music since that time have all made a very serious contribution to it. Take you now into this little side chapel here, because I wanted to let you see for the first time a memorial tablet we put in here a few years ago.
Oh! In memory of Sir David Willcocks, MC, 1919 to 2015, organ scholar, director of music, and honorary fellow. That's absolutely lovely, because he made an enormous mark upon the music making, not just within this chapel, but really throughout throughout the world. I first met him as a member of his harmony and counterpoint class.
Okay.
In those days, the director of music at King's College was more or less automatically a member of the music faculty and had teaching responsibilities, which Sir David took seriously, but it had to be crammed into the few spare corners of a very busy musical life. And he had a weekly class held in the old music school in Downing Place. And I was one of a group of, I suppose, about 9 or 10 of us. And at the end of one of the classes, he took me aside and said, "Mr. Rutter," he said, "I understand you've been composing. Kindly bring me some examples of your work to my rooms in King's." So at 9 o'clock on the next Monday morning, I indeed brought him a small pile of some of my very modest compositional efforts. And that was the beginning of a relationship which endured right up until his death. He encouraged me. He was a mentor to me. Something of a hero, really, because it's hard to imagine this now, but the director of music at King's College was something of a rock star within the church music world, particularly David Willcocks, because he turned his face out towards the world. That's what he really did for the music making at King's. I didn't know Boris Ord, his predecessor. He died in 1961, at which point I was still at school. And I think it's true to say that he welcomed the outside world in the form of broadcasts and recordings rather reluctantly.
Yes.
He didn't embrace these new technologies, but when David Willcocks took over, I think he saw an opportunity to bring the work of King's College Choir to a much wider congregation. I think he saw it as a moral and almost a spiritual obligation, really, to bring to all those people who could never visit King's College in person. They might be in New Zealand, they might be in Malaysia, they might be in the United States, they could be anywhere. And he said, we have got something rather special which we want to share. And something I learned from him was that you should take an evensong on a wet Tuesday afternoon with only a handful of people present just as seriously as a flagship occasion that might be on radio or television.
I was making exactly that point. Yesterday in our team meeting, we can only do the big occasions because we do the other occasions to approximately the same standard. You can't make a huge lift for one day of the year.
No, I think it's rather like a surgeon would probably tell you that he would take just as much care operating on somebody who was not at all well known as he might if it was a member of the royal family.
Yes.
It's an indivisible duty. And you take that on if you accept the post of Director of Music at King's College. I think David saw the choir as something that was there to set an example to the rest of the world, to show how it should be done. And in a way, I think one of the most important things he did was raise the standard of other choirs as much as, I wouldn't say he raised the standard of King's College Choir because it was already very fine under Boris Ord, but he brought it to a much wider public. And I think he thought that, folks, this is how good you've got to be these days. If it's part of Christian worship in a magnificent and historic building, the musical offering should match the offering that the architects and the clergy, the priests, all of those have contributed to something which makes this not just a museum, but a living church. And he was fortunate, actually, to come along when not only stereo recording, but colour television were both invented. And of course, when colour television came along, the Christmas Eve carols from King's on BBC television was something that brought the glory and splendour of the chapel to millions of people who could only imagine it from the radio broadcasts, which, as you say, had been going since 1928. And I think it was a form of evangelism, really, in the best sense of that word. And I think it had enormous influence on anybody who cared about church music. It's a noble tradition which I think has enriched everybody, whether they would count themselves as Christian believers or not. It's something that's inspired us all.
One of the things I wonder about, thinking back to David Willcocks' time and the embrace of the long playing record, is the balance between allowing people to hear music which they know they love and introducing new repertoire, giving them music they possibly hadn't heard before. Things like the Fauré Requiem and the Tallis Lamentations, probably by putting them on an LP, reached ears that many ears had never heard that music before.
Oh, absolutely. The repertoire that was actually recovered from neglect was remarkable. The Fauré Requiem, for example, that you mentioned, not at all well known until the famous recording made of it in 1968 by King's College Choir with Master Chilcott as the treble soloist. And of course it was made in Trinity College Chapel, because that was the year that King's College Chapel was closed for that very important cleaning and remodelling. It was a gift to the whole musical community and really started something that has continued in the years since then through the compact disc era and now the post-compact disc era, where you can more or less listen to anything you like from the history of church music via streaming.
Has anyone had more influence on your life than David Willcocks?
Well, I suppose I would have to go back to my director of music at school. I attended a very musical school in North London, Highgate School, where the director of music, Edward Chapman, had been a Cambridge organ scholar back in the 1920s as a pupil of Charles Wood. Now, here's a name that's synonymous, actually, still with church music, and in particular with Christmas, because he it was who did, among many other things, the classic harmonization of Ding Dong Merrily on High. And he formed a partnership at Gonville and Caius College with the Reverend G.R. Woodward, who fashioned the text of many a carol from that period. Yes. It's worth remembering that actually Willcocks and Rutter were not the first Christmas carolers in Cambridge. Yeah. Wood and Woodward got there years earlier, and there's been a continuous tradition in the Festival of Nine Lessons and Carols to include something by Wood and Woodward. They were greatly influential. They believed in the celebration of Christmas. And between them and David Willcocks, I think it's true to say that they transformed our whole musical celebration of Christmas. Yes.
When Sir David appeared on Desert Island Discs, he was invited to take a luxury. Do you remember that? He asked if he could take King's College Chapel with him.
Oh, well, who would not want it? I don't know whether they had any idea when they designed it that the acoustic would be so magnificent and so unmistakable. But it blesses any form of music that you make in here, whether vocal or instrumental.
So here we are standing between the two sides of the choir. Here, for 37 years, stood Sir Stephen Cleobury, great friend and colleague of yours, who took the legacy of Philip Ledger and David Willcocks further and obviously brought it into this century. One of the great contributions he made was to seek more composition
and particularly commission a new carol every year. What an audacious and great thing to do.
It was not without controversy, of course, when contemporary compositions did appear in the Festival of Nine Lessons and Carols. And I remember being in his rooms when he was going through the fan mail that would arrive in sackloads after Christmas. And there were inevitably a certain number of letters of complaint saying these modern composers of today have no idea how to write a tune. And, oh, do you know that wonderful Bells Across the Snow, that you should be performing.
Yes.
And so you had to endure a certain amount of that. So it wouldn't be true to say that David Willcocks didn't admit new and challenging contemporary music into the repertoire. He did, but he didn't take the step of commissioning it. But when Stephen came along in 1982, I think he said, there are several things I could do that have not been done before. And as you say, commissioning a new carol every year was one of the boldest of them, because it was a way of saying the Christmas carol is a form of folk art, you might say, but we're going to take it into the realms of high art and invite leading composers. And I think it was one of Stephen's proudest boasts that he never had a refusal. No. He asked all kinds of composers. You would not have associated Sir Harrison Birtwistle with Christmas carols, but he actually wrote a rather lovely one. And then when what's known as holy minimalism came in, Arvo Pärt was brought on board, who did a kind of, you might say an Estonian jingle bells with his Bogorodice Dievo.
Which must be the shortest of the competition.
It must have been. This actually made a statement about the importance of contemporary music in King's College's profile. If you look at the list of those who contributed during Stephen's years, it's a kind of hall of fame, really.
Yes.
And of course, quite a number of the carols that were commissioned have passed into the repertoire, not least Judith Weir's Illuminare Jerusalem. And that was long before she was made master of it was then the Queen's music. And so there was an extraordinary achievement. And then, of course, on the recordings front, it was in Stephen's time that King's College, Cambridge said it's time for us to have our own record label so that we can record what we want, when we want, with the guest artists we want, and we can even decide on our own cover designs for the CDs. And if you're in a relationship with a record company, a major record company, which was the only option in the time of David Willcocks, then you're never completely in control. And King's particularly, I remember when they made their first recording of Anglican Psalms, which EMI, their then record label, was highly sceptical about. It only came about because it was supposed to be a recording of hymns with descants and new arrangements done by David Willcocks. He had not had time to do them, and the recording team duly arrived the night before, and the producer, Christopher Bishop, said, well, can I have a glance at the scores, David, the hymns? And he said, oh, yes, hymns. Yes. You wouldn't like an album of psalms, would you? And Christopher Bishop said in some astonishment, well, nobody's going to buy a record of Anglican psalms. And he said, well, it's that or nothing. And so they said, oh, all right. And they made an album which was rather naughtily called The Psalms of David. And it became a bestseller, so much so that 2 subsequent volumes were made. There was an appetite for listening to the psalms sung in this chapel by this choir, which nobody really knew was there until the success of the recordings. And I would maintain that if it wasn't for these choir stalls which face inwards, you couldn't actually have such beautiful psalm singing. One of the things that is rather unique to Britain's cathedrals and college chapels is the way that the congregational pews face inwards towards the middle. So the choir is in two halves, which makes antiphonal singing possible in the Psalms, for example. Antiphonal singing is like a tennis match. You bat the music back and forth between two choirs spaced in different places. And we do have, in effect, two half choirs spaced on opposite sides of the centre aisle here. And when they sing antiphonally, they bat the ball from one side to the other. So you hear them in turn, and then at the end of the psalm, when they sing the Gloria, you hear them together. But it also actually means the choir has a very intimate connection with itself. And in the days of David Willcocks, it was quite unusual for him to conduct the choir because he felt that they could conduct themselves. And visitors are sometimes amused during the Psalms by seeing fingers wagging from the back row. The rhythmic wagging of the fingers keeps time in the psalm. And of course, psalm singing is one of the things that the Anglican Church rather prides itself on.
So one of the privileges of being in the chapel when it's quiet is being able to just be quite close to the Rubens at the East End here and quietly absorb the mystery and the wonder of that beautiful painting, which has the Virgin Mary to the right, the adoring kings to the left, the nearest king in the red on his knees.
Yes, it's all about humility, isn't it?
It's lovely that your first response to this painting was humility. And that's an aspect of who you are, I think, John, because when we were talking about commissions earlier on, you kept talking and didn't allow me to interrupt to make the point that you, of course, have made several contributions to 9 Lessons and Carols, and indeed Carols from Kings, 3 different commissions altogether. And I think must have been in 1987 that Stephen first phoned you up or whatever and said, would you be able to offer us something this year?
He did. And if I had thought back at the time, which I'm not sure I did, I would have remembered the teenage boy who enjoyed the recordings of King's College Choir and who listened in on Christmas Eve at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and who never dreamed that one day he might be asked to contribute to the Festival of 9 Lessons and Carols. Stephen had known me for some years. In that particular year, he had 2 excellent baritones in the back row, either of which would have been delighted to have the solo in the Peter Cornelius 3 Kings. Yes. And he said, had he given it to one of them rather than the other, it might have set off ructions and all sorts of rivalries, which he wanted to steer clear of. So very diplomatically, he said, well, would you write something that would fill that same spot, that would go either before or after the Bible reading about the visit of the Magi? And that got him out of his diplomatic difficulty. One of the hardest parts of a composer's job is finding a text to set to music. And I have on my side of the bed at home piles of poetry books that are semi-permanently there. It's very hard to say quite what it is that attracts me to a particular poem, but you know it when you find it. Shakespeare is always a source of inspiration because he understood the difference between a poem which is self-standing and a song lyric which cries out for music to go with it. And I think it's a feeling of a text calling to you, that it jumps off the page and you start to hear music almost before you begin work. And one of the things I always do when I've found a poem that I think I'd like to set to music is to write it out by hand. So in some way I'm making it my own, even though it's there in printed form in a collection. And so it's one of the challenges, but actually one of the great pleasures of writing choral and vocal music, that I spend quite a lot of time with my nose in poetry books. And I've got a vast collection of them.
And the text was, I don't think we've mentioned what the text was.
Robert Herrick, it was always intended to be set to music because it was for a masque enacted in Whitehall Palace on New Year's Day. I don't believe the music survives, but the text of course does. I love Robert Herrick because, like George Herbert, he was able to write religious poetry that encompassed quite big thoughts in quite small spaces and in simple words. And any composer will tell you that when you're looking for a text to set to music, you want something simple. What sweeter music can we bring than a carol for to sing the birth of this our heavenly King?
Beautiful text, and it's a beautiful and deeply moving melody. How did that melody come to you?
Well, you know, the question every composer gets asked is, where do you get your ideas from? And if I knew the answer, I would bottle it and sell it, but I haven't the faintest idea. You sometimes know when you've hit on something that's right, and sometimes you know when you've hit on something wrong and you have to carry on until you can improve it. I don't remember the process of writing this particular piece. I was quite ill at the time. I had an illness I don't recommend to anyone called ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis. And like malaria, it cycles on and off. You have good days and bad days. And on my bad days, I could scarcely get out of bed. But on a good day, I began work on this piece. And I was able to deliver it on time because that remains a sacred obligation for every composer. Don't deliver late.
So just to get this clear, your composition, What Sweeter Music, came out of a time when you had a ME.
Yes. Yes, it very much did. Everything was a struggle. It was a period of almost 7 years. I had originally been asked by Stephen to write a substantial piece for King's College Choir to perform in what were then their annual concerts at the Barbican.
Yes.
And I had to back out of it and say, Stephen, I don't think I can do it. I haven't got the physical strength. And he was a very kind and sensitive person, and this is something that remained rather private, actually. He was known for all his public good works and so forth, but in private, he showed me extraordinary kindness because he knew how bad I felt about not being able to fulfill a 40-minute commission. And he thought, well, perhaps a 4-minute carol might be something that John can manage. And I think that may have spurred him on to invite me when he did. And so there it was. He gave a lovely first performance with the choir and continued to feature that piece in a number of festivals of 9 lessons and carols. So I'm most honoured. It was the first time I was ever asked to write something specifically for King's College Choir. Sir David Willcocks slightly backed away from it, I think because people might have thought that, well, this young fellow is something of a Willcocks protege, and that it might look like favoritism. Though, of course, he did invite me to write my first substantial work, which was a piece called The Falcon, performed by the CUMS, the University Chorus and First Orchestra, together with King's College Choir. He said he would throw them in if I wanted them. And he said, well, we've got a 20-minute spot vacant in a CUMS concert it was November 1969, would I like to write something that might fill that spot? And it was first performed here in King's College Chapel under his direction. So this is another very happy personal association with my past life, starting out, taking my first footsteps into the world of composition. And it happened right here.
I'm so glad you've been able to come in today, John. It's been such a privilege to hear you talk about these deep associations and these much loved and incredibly gifted directors of music that we've had here. After Stephen died, you were asked to write a piece of music in his memory by the Lord Taverners, I think.
Yes. They were about to give a concert that was to be conducted by Nicholas Cleobury, Stephen's brother. And I felt, as we all did, how tragic it was that Stephen's last years were overshadowed by terrible illness, and how brave he was.
Incredibly brave.
And I think he was determined to serve this college and its choir for as long as he possibly could. And after his death, I thought, well, how would he like to be remembered? Of course he is remembered in so many ways, but I thought I would like to make a small contribution to that. And writing a Christmas carol is something that comes fairly naturally to me. I've done a fair number of them over the years. And I picked a text of G.K. Chesterton's, which I'd never set to music before. It has been set to music, but the Christ child lay on Mary's lap. And I thought, it's a lovely text. It's a very musical text. And so I wrote the carol that I called All the Stars Looked Down. And I'm sure they did on Stephen and on his work here during those years.
Lovely tribute to make to him, and it was a terrible loss that he died so soon after he retired. But it was really an amazing experience to work with him over those last few years, and to see in the way in which he battled against his deteriorating health and his increased pain as well, really never letting it show and never letting it get in the way of what for him was, a perfect combination, I think, of duty and delight. In a way, I think that's one of the wonderful things about being in here, about enjoying music, being close to music, is that it requires the strongest of disciplines, but it transcends itself into something else.
It does. There is a tradition which is, I think, greater than the sum of its parts,
Yes.
in a way. This has been a house of prayer, but it's built into the statutes, I think, that it would also have a choir. Is that
Yes.
not true?
It is, yes, from the very first, yes.
From the very first, to pray for the soul of the founder,
Yes, clerks and choristers.
clerks and choristers, which continues to this day. I always get cross, really, with those who disavow this great tradition. After all, Cheddar does cheeses, and Harris does tweeds, Cambridge does choirs. This has always been a city of choirs, which is something I think we should celebrate. Goodness me, we should cherish it and celebrate it.
That was John's carol, All the Stars Look Down, the title track from the choir's latest CD, which is brought out to celebrate and commemorate his 80th birthday. Recorded in King's College Chapel, the disc features King's College Choir and the Britten Sinfonia under the direction of Daniel Hyde, and it includes music by John Rutter and those who were important influences on him. Of course, there are plenty of his carol arrangements, as well as music by people he mentioned in the interview, David Willcocks, Philip Ledger, and Stephen Cleobury. You can listen now. The album is available as a CD, as a digital download, and on all the major streaming platforms. And it's doing really well. Already surpassed 1 million streams and reached number 3 in the Specialist Classical chart. It's a very special album, and John is a very special composer. And it's wonderful that we can celebrate it through this album and indeed through this encounter that we've had today. Well, actually, that was meant to be the end of this episode, but as it happens, Daniel Hyde just popped into the office, and so I thought I'd ask him a few questions about the album and about John Rutter's contribution and our relationship with him. Okay, Dan, it's really good that you're here. We were just talking about the choir's new album. Where did the idea of that come from?
Given that John was turning 80 this year, I wanted to do something which the King's Choir hadn't done before. We've recorded a lot of his music. We've put out all sorts of different versions of his music, some pieces of which, of course, he's written for the choir specifically. But we've never put out an album of carols with orchestral rather than organ accompaniment. So it was a good opportunity to talk to John about the different versions that exist of his pieces.
So, Dan, just tell us about the mix of music that you have on this CD.
Well, the music on this disc is not all by John. And of course, many Christmas carols are well-known tunes, which a composer then arranges, both with their own harmony, but with their own ideas about repetition of text and melody and so on. So this disc is actually designed to reflect not only John's music in and of itself, but also his relationship to the college, which is why we've got music by other former directors of music and 2 Jonians. That's a big, step forward.
2 Jonians, who are they?
Christopher Robinson and David Hill.
Lovely. Now, when I met with John in the chapel, he spoke at length about his relationship to it. Coming into the chapel in 1964, when it was a very different kind of chapel, very dark and sooty. The Rubens wasn't even in place then. And it's been part of his life, and he's been part of the chapel's life this last 60 years. How would you sum up that relationship?
I think it's a very healthy and very supportive relationship. I think John has been extremely kind to all the directors of music he's known. I know he was a great friend of Stephen Cleobury. I'd never really spoken to him much about Philip Ledger, but I'm sure, as he was with Willcocks, he would have been anything, but helpful and all the things that he is to me. I think he loves the place.
And he said, he produces a lot of Christmas carols. It's part of what he does. But when it comes to your job of putting together the playlist, as it were, for 9 lessons and carols, or for carols from Kings on the television, how do you think about where you would put a Rutter piece with the music of other composers?
Well, I think there isn't one way of doing it. I think John is a melodist and has a wonderful sense of harmony. Putting a Rutter carol juxtaposed with something completely different. I think last year I put some Lassus polyphony alongside, and actually there were quite a lot of comments after Christmas Eve 9 lessons last year about how well that worked. Where do I put his carol? Usually I answer that question by thinking about the text. And as with all the carols, you try and place them before or after a reading to which they refer. But you can actually create a different sense of flow in this service that is very structured. The 9 lessons stay the same. But by moving the music around, do you preempt the reading or do you reflect after the reading? You can change the arc, the sort of narrative arc.
Now, I know soon after this conversation, you're going to take the choir off to Estonia. And there's a last question. It's a kind of quiz question for you, because John came up with a phrase that I wasn't expecting at all, and just wondered whether you could make sense of it and identify what he was referring to. Estonian jingle bells.
Well, Estonian jingle bells. I'm sure. Well, I suppose John's 80 this year, but Arvo Päht's 90.
Yeah, you're close.
So, is he referring to the carol that Arvo wrote for the choir in 1990, where Stephen Cleobury used to tell the story that Bogorodice Dievo was 1 minute long, because when he commissioned Arvo Päht to write the carol, he asked what the fee was, and I believe the fee was given at a value of money per minute. Yeah, and so Stephen Cleobury said, we better have 1 minute then. But the carol, I can hear what John means. It's different rhythms, the time signature changes, but it's on a repeated note. That's probably where he's getting it from, the idea that it starts with a single note, sort of sleigh bell, and then the boys and the altos move around in thirds. And yeah, I can hear the sort of jingles in there. But it's amusing to hear one composer talk about the music of another, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yes. Thank you very much.